and that's midnight Saturday night. When the great outback rivers flowed all the way to Lake Ayre last year, it was cause for great celebration after a long dry spell in the arid centre. It was expected it would be years before another big flood would happen, but the rivers are running for the second year in a row, again delivering to Lake Ayre, except that this time the deluge has triggered an even more spectacular explosion of life in the deserts of Central Australia. Paul Lockyer reports from Lake Ayre.
Lake Ayre is again a jewel in the desert. The huge glistening salt pan in the South Australian outback is now a myriad of colours and forms as floodwaters swirl across the surface. There's nearly as much water in the lake as there was at the height of last year's flood, with more to come.
Everything that was a river ran this year, virtually in inland Australia.
The water will continue to flow for months, slowly working its way down the ancient rivers of the outback. The Cooper Creek sweeping into Lake Ayre from the east, and the Diamantina River and the Ayre Creek emptying into floodplains in the north. From there, the water is channelled down the Warburton Creek, running to Lake Ayre through some of the most arid country on earth.
The cartographers call it a creek, which is demeaning, I think. You know, we call it a river. It's a sometimes river, isn't it? That's what it is.
Rex Ellis, outback adventurer, is seizing this rare opportunity to take a tour group down the Warburton to Lake Ayre.
I mean, it's not often you get a chance, is it, to come down a river in the middle of Australia which goes into Lake Ayre.
While there may be deserts on both sides of this river brings life to the whole area.
And to be able to see deserts from a boat on a huge river that's in 2 years' time is going to be a baking hot, dry watercourse, how can you resist doing it?
But this is the highlight of the journey, where the Warburton Creek flows into Lake Ayre.
Muslims like to go to Mecca, Aussies like to go to Lake Ayre.
Rex Ellis has witnessed every flooding event out here for the past 50 years and famously took a boat right across Lake Ayre when it last filled to the top in 1974. He believes this year is shaping up as the biggest since then.
I mean, this is the driest state and the driest continent on Earth, apparently, and apart from Antarctica, and there's more water in northeast South Australia than you can poke a stick at.
But Lake Ayre is just one of many gems in the outback created by the flooding rains. These wetlands have suddenly emerged at the top of Lake Yama in far western Queensland. Water is filtered a clear blue as it streams in from the Cooper Creek, forming intricate patterns as it runs into the muddy lake. Yama seldom sees any water, but now looks like it belongs in the tropics, not the outback. Here and on the waterholes and rivers all around Lake Ayre, pelicans are breeding in huge numbers, trying to make up for the years lost to drought. Last year there was great excitement when pelicans gathered on a lake north of Birdsville, a breeding event documented by environmental scientist Professor Richard Kingsford.
There's probably 40 to 60,000. It's very difficult to know because they're just so close together.
But it came to a tragic end in the spring when the food stocks in the lake declined and thousands of pelicans died. Everywhere are still the signs of the disastrous end to that breeding event last year. The floods have returned, but not the pelicans, not to this spot of land anyway. They've chosen this year instead to relocate to a nearby island where they'll breed again. They're jammed onto a tiny crescent of land, laying their eggs. None have ventured back to their old breeding grounds.
Another one of these really interesting questions. It'd be lovely to know why. I mean, we don't even know the basics about where these birds are going, why they know to go to a place, let alone the subtleties of why they might be choosing between that peninsula and that one.
I reckon it's really good that they don't know some of these things, and they probably never will.
The biggest mystery is how the birds know the rivers are again flowing in the outback. But many species of water birds have made the long journey to the centre of the continent, returning to old breeding spots that can stand empty for year after year. Last year's flood provided a crucial boost to dwindling numbers. This year is a very welcome bonus.
These boom periods when the whole biological system takes off, and whatever level you're looking at, from the microscopic up to the pelican, they're doing their thing.
Birds of prey fill the skies over the floodplains. The dingoes, usually little more than skin and bone, are sleek and well fed. Out in Lake Ayre, seagulls have flown in from the coast to breed. They're regular visitors to Central Australia at flood times, but not usually in these numbers. They sense that this will be a bountiful season. And if the early explorers had come out here in a year like this, with water lapping at the edge of Lake Ayre and seagulls nesting on the islands, they would have been forgiven for believing that they truly had found Australia's inland sea. But they might have encountered great difficulties crossing the swollen waterways. It's 150 years since Burke and Wills set out on their ill-fated expedition to cross the continent from south to north, setting up camp on the Cooper Creek as they went. They would have been astounded if they'd been met by this flow coming down the Cooper.
To me, the Cooper is the epitome of outback. It's supposedly geologically a dying river, but here she goes again.
The flood front is inching its way towards Lake Ayre, filling up every crevice and depression on the wide floodplain before it moves on. It swamped the Birdsville track for the first time in 20 years, although the adventurous were still prepared to risk the crossing. A 40-year-old punt gathering dust in the desert has been pressed back into service to ferry traffic across the Cooper. In this same region, dust storms ravaged the countryside on their way to cloak much of the east coast late last year.
Looks more optimistic than it did before Christmas, anyway.
You betcha, yep. Heart was just about out of it before Christmas.
So severe was the drought on Gidgyalpa Station that Jason Barnes was forced to get rid of all his cattle. Now he's restocking on a property surrounded by floodwaters from the Cooper.
Almost a lunar environment to paradise now. It's unreal. One extreme to the other.
After marking the new cattle, they had to be taken across a flooded road to an island of feed. It turned out to be a very tricky exercise. The cattle were coaxed to high ground. They'll form the core of Gidgyalpa's new herd.
Luckily, we've got onto some good cattle here. We've got good starting block. We should be all right.
It's a new start on all levels, as nature follows a pattern as ancient as the country itself. Visitors can only marvel.
You need to be reminded of just how good we've got it here.
So when I get old and decrepit and can't remember anything, I'll remember this.
Well, lucky with that report, and those superb pictures were shot